Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the How to Handle Conflict Without Destroying Your Connection episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are rebuilding their lives and relationships after breakup or divorce, helping them understand their relationship patterns, grow into the best version of themselves, and create deeper love and real connection, showing up differently for the next chapter of their lives so they can live the life they love. So, what if conflict itself isn't actually the problem in relationships? What if the real issue is how we move through it? Because, man, every couple experiences conflict. Every couple hits friction, misunderstandings, disappointments, emotional triggers, unmet needs, and painful moments. All that part is normal. But for a lot of men, conflict feels threatening. We were taught to defend ourselves, shut down, power through it. Don't be vulnerable. Be louder, be colder, or win the argument. Well, unfortunately, most of us were never taught how to stay emotionally connected while navigating hard conversations. So instead of conflict becoming a bridge to a deeper understanding, it often becomes a slow erosion of trust, safety, and intimacy. And man, over time, unresolved conflict can quietly destroy relationships even where the love is still there. So what if you could move through conflict in a way that actually strengthens connection instead of destroying it? Well, that's what this episode is all about. I remember being in a relationship where my ex and I would run into conflict. And we would have these talks, right, that would go on for hours with absolutely no resolution. And just when I thought we finally ironed things out, it would start all over again. Same arguments, same conversations that would go round and round and round, same emotional exhaustion. It was draining, man. And over time, that pattern slowly eroded our connection until there was really nothing left to do but to end the relationship. And at the time, I didn't have the skills to navigate conflict in a healthy way. I didn't know how to regulate myself emotionally. I didn't know how to set boundaries around those marathon talks, right? I didn't know how to pause instead of react, or communicate in a way that created safety, or even repair a connection after those hard moments. And honestly, I had no idea those things were even possible when I was going through those marathon sessions. But now, having learned those skills and continuing to practice them, my wife and I are able to navigate what we call tight spots with respect, compassion, and grace. And what's interesting to me is that afterwards, we actually feel more connected because of how we got through it together. And that's the difference healthy conflict skills can make. Now, I'm going to share a story about a guy I'll call Drew, not his real name. But first, I want to mention some of the skills that men can learn that completely change the way conflict is handled in relationships. Skills like regulating your emotions, mindful communication, active listening, repair after conflict or making a mistake, setting boundaries around those toxic conversations, validating emotions without getting defensive right away, being vulnerable instead of accusing, staying grounded when you're triggered, and learning how to slow conflict down instead of escalating it. And I got to tell you, most men were never taught these things. No, man, we were taught, don't be weak, don't get emotional, handle it yourself, or don't give in, fight for your position. But the thing is, healthy relationships require emotional intelligence just as much as strength. And that brings me to Drew. Again, not his real name. Drew was a client from the clinic where I work. He had been in a relationship with who I'll call Sydney for about 5 years. And he absolutely loved Sydney. And for the most part, they got along really well. But when conflict hit, the relationship would completely derail. Sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for a day, sometimes for several days, and sometimes for weeks. The biggest issue was that Sydney worked at the same company as her ex-husband. Now, Drew had been cheated on by his ex-wife previously, so this situation triggered him deeply. And to make matters more complicated, early in their relationship, Sydney admitted that she had slept with her ex-husband once out of what she described as pity. She was remorseful, and she swore that it would never happen again. And over the next 5 years, she had been faithful. But the thing was, Drew still struggled with it, especially when Sydney worked late. And I gotta say, to his credit, Drew eventually recognized something very important. He admitted his trust issues didn't come just from Sydney. They also came from his past, being cheated on before in his marriage, and from growing up with a father who repeatedly disappointed him. Broken promises, missed visitations, lots of excuses, and a lot of emotional inconsistency. So with this, I validated Drew's feelings and acknowledged him for connecting the dots between his past and his present struggles with trust. Because, man, that kind of awareness matters. So we did a lot of processing around that. And we also started working on mindful communication skills. And during a session where we were role-playing, Drew said something really important. He said, "Bill, when I hear the way you say things, it sounds great. But when I try to do it, I get all flustered and tongue-tied." And then he asked me if I could just talk to Sydney for him and say what he wanted to say. Well, I respectfully declined. But I did agree to mediate with the two of them together. And during that first session, I discovered what the real issue was. It wasn't just what Drew was saying, it was how he was saying it. His tone, he was using accusatory language, and he had this emotional energy behind his words, a lot of anger in there. And because of that, Sydney would get immediately angry and defensive and shut down. And when I brought that to their attention, Sydney felt incredibly validated. But Drew felt betrayed. He thought I was taking her side. So I told him, "Look, man, I completely understand why you'd feel that way, because that reaction makes sense to me." And that moment was important, because instead of arguing with him about his reaction, I validated it. And over time, as we continued to work on his communication skills, something shifted. Drew finally learned how to express his fear, his pain, his hurt, and his insecurity in a way that Sydney could actually hear it. And once she felt emotionally safe enough to hear him, she became empathetic toward him. And at one point, Sydney even offered to find another job if it would help Drew feel more secure in the relationship. And Drew couldn't believe it. He finally got the recognition he had been starving for. And ironically, the moment she offered to quit, something softened in Drew. He realized he didn't actually want her to quit. And the fact that she cared enough to offer changed everything. Eventually, she did choose to change jobs, and today their relationship continues to thrive. And what I want to emphasize why Drew's story was so powerful is that conflict wasn't destroying their relationship. The way they were handling conflict was. And once Drew learned how to communicate his pain without being accusatory, Sydney no longer felt attacked or judged. And once Sydney stopped feeling attacked and judged, she could finally respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. that's what healthy conflict does. It creates understanding instead of disconnection. So let me talk about how men can actually do this, all right? First is to learn to regulate before you communicate, all right? I feel like a preacher saying that. Learn to regulate before you communicate, because most men were taught either to explode or suppress, right? But healthy conflict starts with that regulation. And what that means is to slow down, man. Breathe, get yourself grounded, and recognize when you are being flooded emotionally. Yeah, research from my go-to guy, Dr. John Gottman, shows that when we become physiologically overwhelmed during a conflict, productive communication becomes almost impossible. So sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is just pause. Not abandon the conversation, not stonewall, but intentionally pause before you go any further. Next is to speak from vulnerability instead of accusation. Because nobody wants to get a finger pointed at them, right? That's going to set off their triggers. And it's understanding that most conflict escalates because underneath the anger is all this pain. But so many men were never taught how to express this pain directly. Instead of saying, I'm scared, or I feel insecure, or I'm afraid of losing you. We say something like, oh, you never care, you always do this, or you can't be trusted. Well, saying it this way creates defensiveness, right? But saying it the other way creates the connection. You see the difference? And another thing is listening, really listening. Listening to understand, not to win. And a lot of men unconsciously approach conflict like they're in a courtroom, like who's right, who's wrong, who wins. But look, man, relationships aren't courtrooms or debates. They're emotional ecosystems, okay? And a healthy conflict requires a sense of curiosity. And what that means is listening for your partner's pain or her fears, the unmet needs, or an emotional experience that your partner's having, even if you disagree. You just want to validate the experience, not necessarily that it's true, it's just their experience. And stop trying to resolve everything in one conversation. And this was huge for me personally. Those marathon talks that I mentioned earlier, completely exhausting, man. I mean, I would be wiped out. Healthy couples know how to pause and revisit their conversations later. You don't have to force a resolution to the conflict at 1 o'clock in the morning when you're emotionally depleted. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can say is, look, I love you and I want to continue this conversation, but I need a reset. I think we both do. That can shift everything. Another thing is something that I mention a lot, and that is repair. Repair matters more than being perfect. And I've also said a lot of times that conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. And what's important is how you repair after that conflict. Repair is what determines relationship success. Can you reconnect after tension? Can you own your part? Can you apologize sincerely? Can you soften? And can you kind of reach back toward connection versus disconnection? Because that's the real work. It's not being perfect to avoid conflict or anything like that. Conflict will happen. So it's not perfection. It's repairing after conflict or after you've made a mistake. And listen, if nobody ever taught you these skills, that doesn't mean you're broken, all right? It means you're learning now. You're becoming aware. And the beautiful thing is these skills can absolutely be learned. That's the good news. And I've seen men actually transform their relationships once they understand that conflict doesn't have to mean emotional destruction or aggression. It can actually become the doorway to deeper connection and intimacy. And if you're struggling with conflict in your relationship, if conversations keep turning into shutting down, to getting defensive, being resentful, or creating this emotional distance, I want you to know there's another way. You can learn more by visiting my website, menonthepathtolove.com, and find out more about my coaching and how I support men who want to rebuild after breakup or divorce, to communicate better, rebuild trust, and create healthier relationships. Once again, that's menonthepathtolove.com. All right, well, we have reached the point of my quote of the week, and it comes from writer, poet, speaker, and fellow Substack contributor, Young Pueblo. He says, quote, "The strongest people are the ones who can stay open-hearted in difficult conversations," unquote. Yeah, that's right. Real strength in relationships isn't about shutting down, winning the argument, or protecting your precious ego. It's about staying emotionally present when things get uncomfortable. And the men who can remain open-hearted during difficult conversations create the deepest trust, connection, and intimacy. And on that note, I will bring this episode to an end. The How to Handle Conflict Without Destroying Your Connection episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thanks so much for listening. Now, coming up on the next episode, as I continue my series on building a healthy relationship, I want to address something that comes up a lot in my work. And that is the perception a lot of men have about masculinity and what it means to be strong, and how that perception or our conditioning negatively impacts relationships. So I ask you, what if the version of strength you were taught is the very thing keeping you disconnected from the love you actually want? Please join me for the What Men Were Taught About Strength That Hurts Relationships episode. And if this episode you're listening to right now spoke to you, then please share the link with another man who may need to hear it. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review, subscribe, or just help spread the message, all right? Yeah, man, share the link to this podcast and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.